Rathke, Chief Organizer of ACORN International, with my associate and colleague here in Delhi, Dharmendra Kumar, who is the Director of the India FDI Watch Campaign and of ACORN India's organizing here in Delhi. So I'm going to ask Dharmendra a couple of questions so that he can give us some background. The first, we're going to talk about the exciting new work that we've been doing in Delhi with shelters as an organizing tool with dispossessed families and migrant workers and others. So, you want to explain what we're doing, Dharmendra?
Yeah, sure. Delhi recently has been drawing a lot of migrant workers, particularly from the poor states of India. So these migrant workers who come up Delhi for some kind of construction work end up as a wage laborer without shelters. So there was a need to provide the basic amenities to survive in a city, and shelter was one of those basic amenities. So we worked with the city government to convince them and to persuade them to open up, build shelters for homeless.
Excellent.
So right now we have 3 shelters which are temporary. Temporary means they are running continuously for more than 2 years now, but that's not in a permanent building. So that's why we called it temporary shelters for homeless.
And these are in tents or?
These were earlier tents. We have started with tents, but now it is a semi permanent structure with tins and aluminiums and woods.
Gotcha.
It's not exactly tents, but somewhere between tents and buildings.
Gotcha.
And we also have got one permanent shelter which is housed in a 2-story building, which has a capacity of holding 100 homeless people every night. So all of these 4 shelters are located in the heart of the city, and we are able to cater to around 200 to 300 homeless citizens, and we are happy that we are playing our part in ensuring the rights of the homeless citizens and also ensuring the constitutional rights of our brothers.
And I think you told me our 4 centers are among more than 80 throughout Delhi at this time.
Yeah, there are more than 80, exactly 84 temporary shelters and more than 30 permanent shelters running by the government of Delhi, throughout Delhi.
And this program is a fairly new program from the Delhi Municipal Corporation?
We had to struggle a lot for this program, and there was a demand from all of us and a continuous engagement with the state authorities and city authorities and even the judiciary to launch this program. And this is a new program and only a couple of years.
And tell us a little bit about that struggle.
Actually, we started working with the housing rights for the people. And when we started talking about the housing rights, that time Delhi was, you can safely term, a city of slums. We didn't had any mega slum like we have Dharavi in Mumbai.
Exactly.
But we had many small Dharavis in Delhi.
Many small Dharavis. Exactly.
In Delhi. So, in the meantime, Delhi has been turned into a world-class city, as they say it. So this world-class city basically displaced those living in the slums. Slums got demolished, and there was violation of housing rights. People were destabilized, their houses were destroyed without giving them any alternatives. So we worked with championing the causes of right to house, and this was part of that somewhere we need to begin at one stage to provide some kind of shelter, some kind of roof.
Exactly.
And then we are trying to move towards a permanent solution where government has already launched a scheme called Rajiv Gandhi Housing Scheme. So, which aims to provide low-income houses to all the people who have been displaced in the process of making Delhi a world-class city.
And this was natural for us given our organizing among bicycle rickshaw drivers, domestic workers, and around slum relocation for the Commonwealth Games, wasn't it?
Yeah, ACORN since the beginning had been organizing basically informal workers and low-income people and families, which largely comprises bicycle rickshaw pullers, casual laborers, construction workers, street vendors, and rag pickers. So this was a demand that came from our membership, that we must have a kind of shelter near our livelihood. The challenge was that whatever the proposal that was coming from the government of providing shelter was very far from the place of their livelihood.
Right.
So the challenge still remains before us to provide a dignified all-weather shelter or house, probably or ideally, near the place where they work. So we still struggle through our various committees of rickshaw pullers, rag pickers, street vendors to secure their livelihood where it is and to provide housing rights where they need it.
Many years ago, you and I and some of our members visited some of the relocation areas, which are a long, long way away from the center of the city. It took us like an hour and a half to get to some of these locations, and once you get there, what do you find?
People were living in the heart of the city. Their places got destroyed, and some of them who were documented and who could prove that they were resident of the city had been rehabilitated. But as you said, that the rehabilitation was done very far from the city, in fact at the border of the city, and almost 40, 50 to some cases even 60, 70 kilometers far from the center of the city. The worst part was there was hardly any communication or infrastructure available at the places. It was basically a barren land where some houses were created as small, where only one person can sleep. If you are a family of 3 or 5, or in case of India, you usually have a family of 7 or 9 in some cases, there was not enough space even to sit in those houses. So those teeny spaces were provided on lease to these slum dwellers very far from the city, and in practice it was not practical for the people to move there. So most of the houses, resettled houses, are still vacant because people are in Delhi to earn.
Housing has to be connected to livelihood.
Exactly.
And these places were usually about 200 square feet. They're very small, 200, 250 square feet or meters.
It's much less than that.
Much less.
Much less than that.
I'm giving them too much room. But they were very small, not, bigger than this table, but not very large. Not as big as this room where we're doing this.
It's 8 by 4.
8 by 4.
So you can say one single bed.
And I know when we visited some of the Delhi relocation places, the sanitation standards were not high. There was obviously communal water taps and a shower and this, that, and the other. But on the whole, it's pretty rough living conditions in terms of once they're built, the city doesn't provide ongoing services.
Interestingly, the city is projecting that as a model colony. And for them, I don't know why it looks like a model, but it's almost a hell. If there is a hell, it's basically these colonies, because there are mosquitoes, there is no sanitation, there is no drinking water, the schools are not there, and there is hardly any facility needed to survive.
Well, and I think, unless I remember incorrectly, there are sort of crime elements that end up taking over some of the commercial and infrastructure.
Yeah, there are elements which have been, trying to snatch whatever rights poor have got through their struggles.
Right.
So poor have a front on the agenda to defend whatever they have got from the state.
Part of the program around running these shelters also came from our work around the Commonwealth Games, which now seems a long time ago, but really was fairly recently. But what's happened with the whole Commonwealth Games once they were over?
There were two parts of the Commonwealth campaign that we ran and is still running to some extent. One part was the development design that was planned for the city. That development design was anti-poor and anti-migrants, and it was anti-poor and anti-migrant simply because the development design was based on modernizing things, and the part of modernizing was that the poor people should not be seen from the modern places, and we had a series of overbridges and extended roads and metros, which all came up on the spaces occupied by the poor.
Exactly.
So the process of organizing the Commonwealth Game displaced millions of people from the city, and most of the displaced people were homeless, were people with whom we worked, rickshaw pullers, and nothing was allowed for almost a year. And we worked with such kind of people who cannot survive even for a day without work.
Right.
And they were not allowed to pull their rickshaws, they were not allowed to vend their stuffs in the streets, they were not allowed to do any kind of activity almost for a year in Delhi, because Commonwealth Games had to be organized. The second part was that of corruption, that it is now almost proved, and people including the chairman of the Commonwealth Committee and all the big authorities associated with the Commonwealth Game are now behind bars, because there are almost proven charges of corruption now.
Particularly around the construction.
Around constructions and around the procurement of everything, the timer, the visual, the lights, even the plants.
Which means a lot of our communities that were dislocated because of the construction were sort of negatively impacted by some of these same corrupt practices.
One of the Commonwealth village, which was built to house the players, was built on the bank of the Yamuna,
Right.
and was built violating the environmental laws. It is not even the bank on the Yamuna, it is in the midst of the Yamuna, and it came up where we had the largest slum of Delhi, that's popularly called ITO slum.
Right, the ITO slum.
So we,
India Tax Office.
yeah,
Right.
income tax office.
Income tax
Tax
office.
So we had the largest slum of Delhi on the bank of the river Yamuna, near ITO, income tax office, which had more than 60-70,000 houses.
Right.
So the whole thing was destroyed by putting it on fire overnight by authorities, and we had been organizing in that slum since 2007, and most of our members were there,
Exactly.
and one of our leading member was charged with putting the whole slum on fire
I didn't know that.
because he was protesting the demolition.
Exactly.
And
Talk about blaming the victim.
yeah, so the victims were blamed, and they were tried in the court only to be released with honor lately. So we still have those people, our members. Some of them have been relocated with our efforts and our struggles, but most of them still live on rented house near that Commonwealth village, and two of our temporary shelters are still there,
Exactly, I
because
thought
we
so.
still have people who neither got house nor can they rent. So we run shelters for those unfortunate members.
And the Commonwealth Games was fall of 2010, right?
Yeah.
So we're talking almost 2 years later.
2 years.
And there's still the mess goes on. But
Yeah.
so a lot of flyovers were built and a lot of improvements to the airport, but it's unclear what people in Delhi got from all the Commonwealth Games.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And the Commonwealth village flats are now being auctioned, now being sold at a very prime price. Which we
Perhaps
cannot-
was what that was all about in the beginning.
Yeah.
I hear you. Let's talk about